Get it out, exactly.
First of all, I would like to introduce myself. We have a lot of guests in the room today. My name is John Arrow, and I am honored and thrilled and delighted to have each and every one of you here today. So thank you for braving closed streets, Secret Service, West Hollywood Sheriff's Department, and whatever else you endured to get here today. My advice to you would be, upon the conclusion of this morning's incredible presentation, to run for your lives. You know, traffic in West Hollywood is notoriously challenged. As they continue on through the next couple of hours in closed streets, it's women and children first. So be good to yourselves and get out while you can, all right? Most of you haven't rounded 40 yet. When you do, it's CBS $7, and you'll be able to see anything that's in front of you. I learned that quite a few years ago, actually. Today's a very exciting day for me and for Bret and for my partner, Michael Williamson, and for the entire company. Today really is the first day that we are officially equipped with the most robust website in the industry. And it's really officially today that we launch Arrow Architecture. A great deal has gone in to the website. I encourage all of you to get on it and to look at all the remarkable resources that it has to offer. It wouldn't be possible for me to stand here today or for you to enjoy the benefits of all that is going to follow were it not for Bret. Bret, would you stand up, please, and let us all thank you. If Bret is the father of our architectural division, then I would say that the aunt and the uncle would be Vicki and Joe Curtis, who have helped immeasurably. Would you please stand up, Curtis Marketing? Very quick story. Susan Jacobs, who wasn't able to be here today, introduced me to Bret. Well, Bret and I know each other for a long, long time. I could probably do one more long and still have underestimated the number of years. And she said, you know, Bret has got this syllabus for an architectural division. And I thought, God, my dream has been that the JAG would have a real architectural division. Not just a label, not a marketing brand, but a real division with highly trained people, highly skilled people, and a lot of resources behind it. So Bret showed me this remarkable syllabus that he's been working on for probably 50 years, maybe a little longer, I'm not sure. Now, I am clearly not the brightest bulb on the tree, but I know when to steal a good idea. And it took me a nanosecond to say, Bret, why don't you come and sit next to me for a minute here? I think there's something to talk about. With that, the dream was born, and today the reality is here. I'd also like to acknowledge our architectural directors. Would you please stand up if you're in the room? All of you? Stand up. Oh, they're so shy. They have been a great sounding board for Bret and myself, and I'm very thankful to them. A friend of Adrian Grant's, a lady named Jan, said to me upon the conclusion of our last presentation, she said, you know, what a cutting edge thing to be doing, to be educating the realtors about architecture. And I thought, you know what, there's more here, there's more to this than I'm aware of at the moment. And so before I wrap, I'm going to tell you that today is series number 4 of what we have now decided will be a permanent, ongoing series of lectures, of which there will be not less than 10 a year. So we will be bringing to you, as the months go on, leading architects, leading designers, leading builders, leading historians. And so it's not an ending process today, it's the announcement of an evolutionary process that will continue on annually. And so for that great idea, John, thank you so very much. You know, introducing Bret is something I thought about all weekend. it's very, very difficult to talk about a man who knows more about architecture and who knows more about Gerard Colcord. I think Bret is the definitive voice on one of the great architects that made LA a more beautiful place to be. So I'm very, very thankful to my good friend and to the founder of our division, Bret Parsons. Thank you very much. Come on up.
I've joined the CBS club. Be for more than $7. Before I start, there's a wonderful omen that's happening in this room that's very fortuitous. And what it is, it may be an error to you, but it's just a wonderful aspect of this morning. If you'll notice, an evening with author Bret Parsons. That's technically not right, but it's very correct. I kept it that way on purpose. In this very room, 4.5 years ago, April of '07, and some of you were with me here, I know William and Stephanie and many others, I gave this presentation. It's been much improved, although 4.5 years ago it was pretty good. And ICA, the Institute of Classical Architecture, had called. I didn't know the group, I didn't know any of the officers. And they called and said, would you please do a presentation for us? We have a gap. We hear you're doing a book on Colcord. So of course what I normally do is, I'd love to. Well, what they didn't know is the book had not come out. It would be another 1.5 years before the book came out. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. All I had was a binder full of great pictures. I knew how I wanted to present it, which is very much like you're going to see this morning. But 4.5 years ago, remember, technology was different. I had 3 guys in that control room, all with laptops, so that if something went down, they could quickly override and keep it going so it appeared seamless. Fortunately, we didn't need that, but they were all back there. 4.5 years later, today, I'm controlling the entire program from my iPhone. It's amazing. So, with that being said, that's the background on the program this morning. Welcome, obviously. It feels very family-like. I love doing this. I'm so glad you came. I think the bottom line for me is it's wonderful to present something that people love. They come to it, they ask me questions. It's very gratifying when you offer something that somebody wants. So with that being said, we're going to start. And if you bring the house lights down, okay. And I'm going to see how this works myself.
Pardon me.
Get some sound. Until the sound starts. Excuse me 1 second. They'll get the sound fixed. We live in the greatest home building region in the world. Now I realize some of you might be thinking, you're crazy, it's Europe. You know, England has it in spades over us. However, what I mean is that due to our climate, our topography, and our affluence, Southern California has been home, no pun intended, to some of the finest residences built over the past 10 years. One of the architects who contributed to this fact is our subject this morning, and his name is Gerard Colcord. If you're not familiar with his name, you've certainly seen his work, as 80% of his homes are located in Southern California, primarily here in Southern California, including many in Beverly Hills. However, for a moment, go back to 1978, when the world was exposed to his work with a little television show, I think you'll recall, starring Robert Wagner and Stephanie Powers. And I'm not sure about the sound, but I'll talk over it. When I interviewed the lady, the car is driving up to a Colcord, and whenever they filmed, there was a kid in the neighborhood that had to nail the H on the gate. And the lady who owns the home told me, please never mention my name in public, which I never have done. And then she said, it'll take you 1 mile to get to my front door once you turn off of Mandeville. The home is on 46 acres, and it is absolutely stunning. It was built in the 30s as a gentleman's hunting lodge, and it is in fact pure Colcord. And this is one of the reasons that I discovered Colcord as a little kid. And here they are coming up to the house. Wish I could sing the theme song.
That's okay.
Pure Colcord. They're inside now, which is actually a stage set that was built at 20th Century Fox. And as you'll see later, dogs are very important to the world of Colcord. And just as an aside, the dog you're seeing, whose name is Freeway, in the series in 1978, they found Freeway on the Santa Monica Freeway 1 week before filming. That's how Freeway got to Heart to Heart. I was initially drawn to the work of Gerard Colcord 30 years ago because of the residence you're now looking at. This 1932 rural French farmhouse-style home located in Bel Air on Strata Porta is known as Horton House and was best known as the residence of Bob Newhart, his wife Jenny, and their 4 kids for almost 20 years. Now you'll gasp. The Newhart purchased the home from Jerry Perenchio in 1973 for $300,000. This property was published many times in various publications, including 3 occasions in Architectural Digest. There was just something about this home that I loved and that I was drawn to, and that put Mr. Colcord on the map for me. Original kitchen. This is a Colcord trick. He took the legs off a modern stove and put it on a plinth to resemble an old French hearth. And there's the back, which faces Sunset Boulevard. About that point you're standing on Sunset Boulevard. Of course, it was a country road then. And we're going to stop on the Horton family. And you can see a very happy family, and you'll see a dog there. That was for some reason that advanced. The eldest daughter in the back, Joanne Horton, would later grow up and marry H.R. Haldeman. I'm sure you know that name.
Yeah.
They are lovely, lovely lady, wonderful interview. And next door was Loretta Young and her mother Gladys Belzer, who was a very famous decorator of the day, and the daughter Judy, who had the child supposedly with Clark Gable, and blah, 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 blah. So it was a very happy, close-knit neighborhood. Let's see, why is this not? Perfect. By day, I'm a realtor and an architectural properties director for the John Darrow Group. For many years before that, I was a mortgage broker. That's when I had lunch with Westside architect Ward Jewell after the successful conclusion of his loan, and he casually asked me who my favorite architect was. And I said, besides you, Ward, since you're buying my lunch, it's Gerard Colcord. So he said to call a client of his who lived in the Colcord that he had just remodeled for a visit. Well, that phone call and subsequent visit turned into almost 300 interviews with an extraordinary cast of Southern California characters, most of whom were current Colcord homeowners. They came from every walk of life, including doctors, lawyers, developers, a couple of moguls, religious leaders, a veterinarian, interior designers, lawyers, writers, a couple of movie stars, lawyers, retirees, lawyers, homemakers, an orchestra leader, educators, and even one major creep who was not a lawyer. I even interviewed former Colcord owners who waxed poetically about the most wonderful home they had ever lived in. As you'll see this morning, a Colcord property conjures up thoughts of storybook houses full of charm and inherent personality, located in the finest neighborhoods in Southern California. The style of these residences implies happy homes, containing a fun and joyful affluent family, tasteful interiors, great smells from the kitchen, manicured gardens, perfectly behaved children, friendly, obedient pets, and neighbors warmly greeted as they dropped in unexpectedly through unlocked doors, which happened many, many times. In other words, it was an environment for a fictional family, which I think everyone at some point in his or her life wishes that he or she had. Colcord homes are often referred to as Leave It to Beaver houses. The kids I met were friendly, and nearly every Colcord has a plethora of pets with which I was on a first-name basis. For example, Willie, Rosie, and Daisy greet me as warmly as their parents do during my frequent visits. However, at this point, I must advise you that my lawyer said to state that no animals were harmed during the production of this presentation. When you write a book, you quickly learn that you run everything by your attorney. I divided this morning's talk into all the questions I received while writing the book. I wrote the book from 06 to 08. It came out in the end of 08. It's almost sold out. You can get it on Amazon.com, and I have some copies, but it's been about 3 years since the book has come out. So I've organized today's program around the 10 most frequently asked questions I heard during the creation of Colcord Home. So for part one, the question I received the most was, I thought Colcord just did farmhouses. Not at all, but that's what everybody thinks. And that was also his genius. I'll start with one here that everyone will recognize because it's practically across the street from the Hotel Bel Air on Stone Canyon Road. And this is the Johnson House, 1936. It's owned today by Leonora Rasmussen. I see folks photographing this home all the time. It's a pure storybook. Most call this a Colcord farmhouse. Technically, it's a colonial revival. You have seen this home in countless car advertisements, and Colcord did so much more that you'll now see. But remember, as you're looking at the pictures, remember, this was his genius. He practiced in every single style known to us. We're going to zip off to Palm Springs. They're in front of the San Jacinto Mountains. And this is Monterey Colonial, 1935 in Palm Springs. It was built for an insurance family from Chicago when they would winter in Palm Springs, obviously. And I want to show you a couple of things. Colcord genius. He wanted his homes to look as if many generations had lived there. That's the charm and the appeal. However, the homes were built very quickly. Right here is called a shed roof add-on. That looks like it was added on. It was very deliberate. It was original. And then another generational aspect is the jutted out wing right here. He wanted the look to be that mom and dad built a house, they had kids, the kids grew up, more kids, they needed more rooms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He wanted homes to look as if many, many generations had lived there. But again, these were all deliberate, they were contrived, and they were built within 9 to 12 months. Now we're going to hop in the car and go to San Marino to Upshur House, 1934. It's a federal neo-regency. From the backyard that you're looking at now, you can actually see Catalina, which you wouldn't think of about being in San Marino. Here's the interior foyer. These are all vintage photographs from 1934. And we're going to go to the dining room, where Colcord was a genius and he loved his tricks. In the dining room, only one window overlooked the garden. So we had Zubair, New York, painted wallpaper resembling the garden on the other 3 walls. We're going to go into the den, which has a very interesting story. There is a secret passage in there. After Rockefeller began renovating Williamsburg, Virginia, after World War II, Americans thought that knotty pine was meant to be stripped and waxed. However, knotty pine, emanating mainly from England, was always considered to be an inferior wood and was always meant to be painted. Americans believe that's not the case, which is why we have knotty pine interiors. However, a painted knotty pine interior is authentically correct. So we're going to leave the Neo-Regency Federal, and we're going to go to Yorba Linda. Colcord did Spanish. A few people realize that. And notice the doggy in the foreground right there. That's what we're looking at, Yorba Linda. And that's from the backyard right there. You can imagine all those beautiful white open spaces. We're going to go to another angle from the back. And notice the added-on shed roof right there. Very deliberate to resemble multi-generational architecture. And we're going to shoot over to Stone Canyon. And we're at Horton House, 1934. John Arrow would sell this at one point in his career, as it was the former home of Peggy Lipton and Quincy Jones. It is exquisitely maintained today with probably one of the finest art collections in this city. And we're going to go about 5 minutes to Boggs House, 1938, a Gamble colonial-style home in Westwood Hills. This one, pound for pound, is pure Colcord. It has some of the most extraordinary detailing I've ever seen. The Colcord arch, the post with the lamp on it. He always did picket fences for his colonial houses. The picket fence served as a picture frame for the house. The add-on right there, and we'll ignore that part. So you go inside, and it's very tight like a ship. These homes were very small. Wood was very expensive at the time, and these were built, through the centuries. But the workmanship is absolutely exquisite. All the hardware would be made by one man in downtown Los Angeles. We're up in the master bedroom now. Colcord loved fireplaces. Most Colcords have 4 fireplaces minimum. And to stay authentic, Fireplaces, particularly in England, were in an alcove part of the room. And the reason for that is, 500 years ago, the heat would escape through a high ceiling. Therefore, you put the fireplace in what's called an angle nook with a very low ceiling so that you can stay warm during winters. And there's the low angle nook right there. We're going to shoot back over to San Marino. This is one of my favorites just because of the sheer drama. Wright House, W-R-I-G-H-T. George and Mary Ann Leal's home. They've been there since 1976. The home was built in 1938. It's based on a 15th century Tudor, probably based upon a medieval country church. And as we go inside, there's the entry hall right there. But what's so dramatic is here's the living room. 25-foot high ceiling. The timbers and the stucco, it's called wattle and staub. You'll see a lot of that right there. But what's most intriguing about the room, and it's huge, it looks intimate in photograph, it's a colossal room. Through this secret panel right here are the pipes for the organ that's up in the choir loft right here. Now remember, 1938, you provided your own entertainment. If you were affluent, usually that meant expensive musical instruments. His and her grand pianos in each corner. The stunning house. Here's the den in that home. The panel is called linen fold. You'll see that in lots of homes. It looks like linen that's rubble. In here, Colcord loved his tricks. Right here, the secretary is actually a built-in piece of furniture. You open the lid of what you think is the desk, and actually you pull out your firewood for the fireplace, which has an exterior loading chute into the desk. Here's the back of the house. It's on 2 lots. They do a lot of English motif TV shows here. And of course, 60 years later, there's a wonderful canopy of oak trees over the entire estate. Now we're in the flats of Beverly Hills. These are 2 homes you've seen forever. Up here is Chambers House. This is on Elm. It would later be the home of Tony Thomas, who would leave his tennis court lights on and upset his neighbors. Right down here is Barnett House, which is Connie Wald's house, which is on Beverly Drive. Now, lots of people get these confused, but I want to point out some of the differences because it's very important, as agents in particular. Because these are very authentic. They were built in the 30s. Below you have shutters because you close them at night for protection. However, above, there, and there, you have louvered shutters so that when you shut them, they provide protection, but also ventilation so that you can sleep more comfortably. Again, both homes are framed with a picket fence. Right there, we have a Colcord arch on this one. A wonderful story about Connie Wald. She's absolutely an extraordinary woman for many, many reasons, and is still living there. She told me that she and her husband, Jerry Wald, who would go on to produce Breakfast at Tiffany's, and he had quite a prolific career. He bought it in 1943. They paid $34,000 for it, and she said that the one they really wanted was up the street, but it was $38,500, and they just couldn't swing it. They bought it in 43, and the reason it was for sale is the current residents, that was their dream home. However, they had to get to the East Coast as soon as possible because of all the newspaper reports about Japanese submarines being seen in Santa Monica Bay. So they moved to the East Coast. Connie and Jerry were able to buy it, probably for less than market value. It's an extraordinarily wonderful house. The next one is very special to me because the second owner is in our audience, and you're all going to know this one. Isn't that right? Harris House on Copa de Oro in Bel Air. Aside from the social aspect, this is an important piece to remember. Glass was very, very expensive when it was invented centuries ago. It's an especially important commission at the time for the owner, Mrs. John Wesley Harris, who was a major philanthropist, major donor to USC. Her husband was a real estate developer. It was inspired by a 16th century English manor house. Just don't remember too many dates, but remember the 16th century. England, the crown had gained supremacy. So you didn't have to protect your property nearly as much. You didn't have a lot of attackers by the 16th century. Therefore, you didn't have to protect your castle as fiercely from attackers. Therefore, these homes could have more glass. An incredible luxury at the time, which was also a major status symbol. That's why in a lot of homes today that replicate old glass windows, you see these little tiny diamond panes. That was original because glass was so expensive and they couldn't produce mass sheets that just that little tiny square of glass was an incredible luxury. And that's why the windows were very, very small at the beginning. Here's the side view you can see from Côte d'Or. This is the one that would be owned by Dean Martin, and then he would send it off to Tom Jones for 20 years, and then that would go off to Nick Cage. You've heard about that in the news a lot. Here's the entrance hall. What's interesting is you have an English house on the outside and a French Rococo interior. Remember, the 30s and 40s in LA, you had all the entertainment talent, you had a great deal of money, you had a great deal of sunshine and light, you could do anything you wanted. So being true to the period was not as critical as doing exactly what you wanted to do. Here's the living room. The dining room. Just a wonderful, wonderful home. Looks huge, incredible human scale. That's the truth, that's the key. So here we go to People Magazine. You've got some of the residents. You've got Tom Jones up there on the left and the right, and then you've got Nick Cage down at the bottom. And then, of course, you see the picture of Dean Martin. Joanne Stalford is here. Joanne, raise your hand. She's right there, second row. She came. Joanne was the very lucky second steward of Harris House from 1964 to 1968. She's one of the warmest ladies you'll ever meet. Her stories about living there are utterly extraordinary. I'll only tell one. Please ask her for other stories, but the one that's my favorite is when she lived there, you see the motor court. She would probably once a week look out the window because there was an errant motorist in her motor court thinking this was the Bel Air Hotel. And she would look out and say, no, dear, you need to go a few more blocks. So as the mistress of the house, she was relegated to giving directions. The most wonderful aspect, I think, is in 1964, and she gave me permission to tell you this, she and her husband, Stanley Stalford Sr., paid $200,000 for the house. They loved it. It was extraordinarily large. The logistics and the staff were difficult to manage. They would sell it 4 years later to the heir of the U-Band coffee fortune, but they would sell it for $275,000. So I like to think of Joanne as the original house flipper of the West Side. Here's the brochure in 1974 with Dean Martin. He would sell it for $1.25 million. So thanks, Joanne. You're just a delightful, delightful lady. Here we are. The brochure. Okay. We're at Hawkins House in Beverly Hills, 1954. A true King of the Hill house. It was a major, major status lot. Bernie Brillstein would live here for many years. They would purchase it from George Siegel. His widow still lives there. Wonderful, warm, extraordinary couple. Colcord did do the contemporary colonnade. The reason for that is it linked the house to the garage where the photograph was taken from. The building pad is very small since it's so high up. And because of that, there wasn't a lot of building space, so we had to separate the garage from the house. But the colonnade, ironically, if you look through the supports, you're looking towards downtown. It's the most extraordinary framing device you've ever seen. It frames downtown like I've never seen in any other home. The home when it was built was very popular, so much so that there were magazine articles written about it. This was in the Los Angeles Times, talking about how it cost an extraordinary $115,000. Here we are in the living room, just exquisitely appointed. And the dining room, if you look out the windows, you'll see the colonnade. We're going to zip down to Trenton Drive in Beverly Hills. This is Nauman House, 1949. It's a neo-regency. The man who built it was an importer of Asian artifacts, which he incorporated into the home. You'll see the antique doors on the right that form the doors for the living room. We go into the living room with the pilasters flanking the fireplace are actually sage-colored granite, and the light band around the top that's actually stage lighting that still works perfectly to this day. Remember, 1949. We shift over to the dining room, that wonderful dome in the ceiling, exquisitely appointed. It cost about $80,000 to build in 1949. Here's Vaughn House up in Bel Air on Stone Canyon. This one had a wonderful owner, Kenneth Vaughn, a major insurance executive here in town who would later go on to gain fame as an extraordinary vintage car restored and would win the concourse many times out of Pebble Beach. Colcord loved to do the house and the garden together. He was an integrated architect, I think, before it even became fashionable. He loved to integrate the design, the architecture, and the landscape. We're going to jet down to Palos Verdes for probably one of the most extraordinarily built homes in California. It's on top of Malaga Cove in the Palos Verdes Estates. It was built in 1968 for George and Betty Wayne. They had actually interviewed Paul Williams. His granddaughter was here a couple of weeks ago and gave that extraordinary talk. Paul was ill, so Gerard Colcord got the commission. And when they designed the house, they created over 700 working drawings for the house. If you'll notice here, Colcord gained fame very quickly because he could draw. They don't teach that anymore. They're big on CAD and whatnot, which is appropriate for today. But there's a real heart connection when the architect actually has pencil in hand and puts it on paper. So there's the rendering right there, and there's the house today. He would also draw the interior of the home. Here's the den. Now, not to be sexist, but this was culture at the time. He drew the outside for the husband, so we saw what was being paid for. He drew the interiors so the wife could see what she was getting. And it was a balanced situation at the time. He would also do the interior floor plan. Good architects will do the landscape, the interior, and the exterior simultaneously. Oftentimes, you'll notice that a hell of furniture lays out in a room. That's the Wayne house. Here we're in Homey Hills, at one of my favorites because it has a very unusual story. It's called Ladd House, built for Alan and Sue Ladd, the major movie star, and 1949 in Homey Hills. They first commissioned Wallace Neff to do the house. They wanted a Hawaiian modern home for their family, which included 4 kids. It was being built. They were not satisfied with what was happening. Therefore, they very politely discharged Wallace Neff, hired Gerard Colcord, who simply did a 1-story French farmhouse on the original foundation so she wouldn't lose any time. There's 2 very funny stories to this house. First of all, the wife was a very, very strong lady. She was one of the industry's first female agents. And she went into the head of Paramount and said, "Mr. Paramount, my husband is the largest grossing movie star at your firm here. We therefore need a $200,000 interest-free loan." She got it. So that built the house. In interviewing the kids, we include Alan Ladd Jr. and David Ladd and Alana Ladd, who's married to Michael Jackson, the radio commentator. She told me the story of the backyard. Alan Ladd Sr. was an Olympic swimming champion at North Hollywood High School, so of course they had the requisite wonderful swimming pool. But Bing Crosby, who didn't live that far away, his kids would always be in this pool because Bing was too cheap to put a pool in his house. So that's a wonderful story. But also, my favorite story is during the 50s and the scare of the atomic bomb and whatnot, it was very fashionable for affluent people to put bomb shelters in at their home. So of course they put a bomb shelter in the front yard. Fortunately, thank God, it was never needed for its purpose. However, David Ladd, the son, who's wonderful, told me it had another use. Every kid in the neighborhood lost his or her virginity. And he had to stand guard so the parents wouldn't come to the door. Santa Anita Oaks, one of the prettiest neighborhoods in Southern California. I was never aware of it. Technically, it's part of the city of Arcadia. It's called Lock House, L-O-C-K-E, 1937. The style is that of the mid-18th century Virginia country house. Mentally, take a picture of this image right now because you're going to see it again in a moment. So on 2 acres, lovely family, the Voight, V-O-I-T, sporting goods family who owned it at one point. It's been owned by Kathy Gormley since about 1966. And here's the entry hall. I did about 300 interviews that I had mentioned earlier. I'm standing exactly where that picture was shot. And I felt a presence behind me. I wasn't sure what it was, but I felt something a little weird. And I was talking to the lady of the house and her daughter and having a lovely conversation, but I kept feeling a presence behind me. And finally, I just couldn't resist anymore, and I turned around. It was a 7-foot statue of Jesus. And I guess I looked a little shocked because she said, "Oh, we're Catholic." But here we go. Here's the living room. Sweet family. The den. Here's the master bedroom with his and her beds. Kathy Cornley told me that on the window seat to the left of the fireplace, there were many family meetings were discussed and arguments settled on that window seat. That's what makes the house a home. In the bathroom, the tiles would be painted by Mr. Colcord's mom, who I'll go into a little bit later. The bathroom is exactly the same condition today. When you do it right, good quality, you don't need to change it. If you turn around, that's your view with an octagonal window. That is a Colcord trademark. Twin girls' bedroom. There were also twin boys in the family, and you can see the, well actually you can't, the tiles are a deer on the backsplash. The second most popular question I got was, were Colcord homes ever used in the movies? Yes, all the time. And here's one of the best examples. Sound. 1998, award-winning movie Gods and Monsters. Actually, it was a very good movie about the life of James Whale, who was the director of Frankenstein movies. And here we have Brendan Fraser playing a gardener for James Whale. And he's driving up to Lockheed House. 1998, Academy Award winner. One thing difference today is the sandblasted off-white paint. Painted brick, very popular in the 30s. Definitely when you want to rest. How many homes did Colcord design and where are they? If you draw a mental map between Malibu, San Marino, and Palos Verdes Estates, that's 80% of his work. The most is Beverly Hills with 82 homes, Westwood Hills with 12 homes, Brentwood 30, and believe it or not, the San Fernando Valley, for a reason I'll go into later, has 23. Very few teardowns, I only found 12. And the reason for that is Colcord homes were large and extraordinarily well built that suited the size of the lot. It rarely makes sense to tear down a Colcord for financial reasons when you work the numbers. One of the most common questions I get, yes, but what about the Colcord Country Colonials? Because that's what made Colcord famous. Here we are at Wolf House, 1949. It's up on Bellagio. It's an important house for many, many reasons. A quick aside, as a realtor selling homes in Los Angeles, the most important demarcation line, and you're going to come off as a genius, is World War II, 1941 to 1945. Before 1941, a few things. You had superior materials, because your materials weren't shipped off for the war effort. You had a 2x4 that measured 2x4. I don't know if you know that, but a 2x4 today does not measure 2x4. Anyway, as Mary Robin Red and I discussed yesterday. So you had superior product. You also had father-to-son training. Bill Smith and Sons masonry. You don't have that today. So you had incredible talent, you had incredible material. 1941 to 1945, everyone is shipped off for the war effort, both in physical labor and bodies, and also materials. After 1945, you come back, America is prosperous, we're victorious, we're the king, we're on top of the hill. Therefore, industry was also burgeoning. The person who was the masonry guy prior to 41 came back to a job that paid him a lot more. Also, during World War II, you had a lot of GIs coming through Los Angeles for training, and also the engineer types that worked for the aircraft companies down in the South Bay. When you had these people come through during 41 to 45 from the Midwest and the East Coast, they saw what California weather was like. So when the war was over, They didn't go home. They said, screw this. I'm coming to California where it's sunny. And chances are they got a very good job. But because of that, think about it, you had a lot of bodies suddenly coming to Los Angeles. Therefore, you had a lot of housing needs. Therefore, the valley got developed kind of by hook or by crook without a lot of planning, because you had to have houses for these families that were returning. However, with that, that's when we started building higher up in the hills. Now, you have a nice rectangular lot in Hancock Park or the flats of Beverly Hills, but if you're affluent after the war, you have to buy a lot up in the hills. That's not rectangular. That's going to have a weird configuration. Colcord pioneered his country colonials with multi-jetted wings to take advantage of the parcel. So he caught all the light, which was wonderful for California, but he was able to take advantage of the lot with all these different directions. So that 41 to 45, it changed the course of LA housing forever. Also, as I'll talk about in a moment, in 41 to 45, residential building ground to a halt, everything for the war effort that I'm going to pick up in a moment. Here we are at Wolf House up on Bellagio, past and present photography. Here we are, past and present today. Wonderful, charming, wonderful home. Here's a reverse view of the living room. And we're looking at the bar, another important piece of World War II. Before World War II, many middle class and affluent people had to live in Maine. You didn't have to pay them much because you gave them housing. That's why we didn't have a huge homeless problem prior to World War II. You had a little bit because of the Depression, but for the most part, you could always be guaranteed a job on an estate. However, after World War II, all these returning folks came back to higher paying jobs, and they said, I'm not going to be in Maine anymore. They went off to higher paying jobs. Therefore, you were not served at home anymore. You served yourself. Therefore, after 1945, Colcord would put a bar in the home next to the living room oftentimes where you would serve yourself. The maid was not going to bring you a drink anymore after World War II. Same thing, this is why our kitchens changed. The housewife took a much bigger role in the preparation of meals for her family. Therefore, we opened the kitchen so that she could be with her husband and the kids. In the bedroom of Old House, typical Colcord fireplace, and also on the right, a Dutch door, which would be synonymous with Colcord country colonials. This home was published many, many times. We had a wonderful publication here in LA called Los Angeles Home, the Los Angeles Times Home Magazine. This is the rear of that house. It's absolutely a wonderful home. Just beautiful, it's exquisitely maintained. It's only on its second owner, Bob and Elaine Ellison, and he would gain fame by writing the Mary Tyler Moore Show. We're going to see a few more country colonials. Here we are, this is a stone canyon, past and present. This was built for Joan Irvine of the Irvine Company in 1949. Inside that house, you see a deliberate Colcord trick. If you look at the window on the left, that is an interior window, done deliberately. It looks into the den right here. It's to look as if a room had been added on for another generation. Here's the country kitchen. Another Colcord trick is the angled fireplace in the dining room. With Colcord, oftentimes the hearth was the same as the stone inside the fireplace. Here's the Colcord country colonial that was built for Godfrey Bell. He would be the nephew of Alfonso Bell, the founder of modern-day Bel Air. And this is up on Fun Shawl, another country colonial. And you've got the Colcord arches there, and you also have a wonderfully authentic trademark here called the Deacon's Bench. The deacon coming from church, he'd come visit you, you'd have your visit out on the porch. Right there. And all was right with the world. Here's the country kitchen side. One thing that I really applaud Colcord with is he was a stickler for detail, but he also loved modern aspects. These were all brand new appliances of the day. Here's the powder room, and if you remove the cushion off the sofa, that reveals the bathtub. So it's a powder room by day, full bath by night. Here's the living room. This is an important story because you find this in nearly every single Colcord. What's called the lintel, L-I-N-T-E-L beam. Obviously, it looks like wood, but code's not going to allow you to do wood and burn up. This is actually a cement beam. Colcord would become famous for the cement beam fireplace. He had two Italian mutes who would make your fireplace log or beam, but you would be banished from the work site. They did not want to reveal their secrets. They would cure a square piece of cement the length of your fireplace. Then they would take wet cement and slap up against it boards that had been sandblasted with knotholes and grain. That would be slapped up against the wet cement. It would cure, and then there would be a 12-step refinishing process to give it that aged log look. Truly, I have been in these homes when an inspector shows up and says to the homeowner, "You better rip this out, it's not up to code." And then they go and knock on it and realize it's all cement. And opposite you in this family room, you'll notice modern sliding doors. Colcord was not against implementing great products. Modern sliding doors were developed because of aluminum developed for aircraft during World War II. And you could make the door light enough to open it. So World War II also brought us a lot of innovations. Colcord had no problem mixing the old with the new. In this case, this home overlooked the Pacific Ocean, and he did not want to obscure the views with painted windows. Ironically, today, the current owners put in painted windows. Colcord even did furniture. This to me is the modern day entertainment center. If you look on the left, there's a radio, and a turntable, and a TV in the middle. These people were rich. Here's the pool on the back, and you'll notice the handles going into the pool. Right there. Colcord perfected that cement aspect, would cover the bars with cement, and then etch it in grain and knots to make it look as if it was branches going into the pool. One of my favorite houses, actually the designers here today, Tom Boland, this is Chasen House, built for George Chasen. Nothing to do with Chasen's restaurant. George Chasen was Lou Wasserman's assistant at Universal. Every major star in Hollywood would go through this house. It's been photographed by Peter Vitale. Extraordinary renovation. What I love about it is it's very traditional on the outside. This is what you see when you drive the Coldwater Canyon. It's on the east side of the street. And there's the backyard guest room or guest house. But what I love is a traditional house on the outside and then a contemporary home on the interior. Good homes, good anything, lends itself to merging with other good things from different cultures or dates. If it's good, that's it. I love the marriage of the old with the new. So why was Colcord so successful? A few reasons. Architects ask me this a lot. But first and foremost, he was talented. You know, he didn't get by on slip marketing. The guy was absolutely talented. He could draw your home within minutes on the back of a scrap paper. He was gracious, fun, and charming, always wanting to accommodate. The word I heard over and over again is gentleman. He had a small staff, usually never more than one assistant. He did about 6 homes a year. He worked all the time. He drew constantly. He didn't have any vendors because he didn't have to worry about HVAC systems or burglar alarms or media rooms, as many building codes, or plumbing for steam showers, or my favorite, he didn't have to worry about Disneyland-like waterfalls plunging into amoeba-shaped lagoons. As one owner told me recently, building our home was the most pleasurable 9 months my husband and I ever had. Colcord was low-key but high-profile. He photographed his homes when they were completed. He was often published, and the reason he was is because since his projects were photographed, the photos were available at a moment's notice to an editor. He was so successful that builders often copied him. I recently uncovered a realtor who sold a home stating in writing it was a Colcord. I told the realtor it was built by a spec builder at the time, and funny, but the realtor never returned my call. A highly suable offense for this boutique agency in Beverly Hills. So, right. But just a whole personal life. I doubt he's worried about the realtor. He was born Gerard Ray, R.A.E., Colcord in St. Louis, Missouri, November 1st, 1900. Parents Walter and Maida. Maida, his mom, would be German. A sister Eunice would be born several years later. His father was a very successful St. Louis businessman who moved his family to Beverly Hills in 1920. His mother was an artist who would go on to paint many of the tiles used in the Colcord homes, as I mentioned earlier. He graduated from the Culver Military Academy in Indiana in 1920, which was where sons of rich families went. Very good school, still in existence to this day. He would then, interestingly enough, go on to USC under special student status. He wouldn't graduate, but he would spend 3 years there. But he was so talented, they shipped him off to the Beaux-Arts in Paris. Wow. To go to the Beaux-Arts in Paris, and if you were an American going to the Beaux-Arts in Paris, you had to be 3 times as good as an architect in Paris. Basically, they did not want an American there. But he was so talented, they let him in. And he would be there for a 6-month apprentice program, graduate at the top of his class. And on weekends, he would sit on haystacks in the French countryside, drawing farm homes and outbuildings. That's why you see so much French farmhouse vernacular in his homes. He would sail back from France to New York in October 1924. He arrived in Beverly Hills to begin his practice when he was only 23 years of age. This is one of the first homes he ever did. It was recently sold. The voice of Homer Simpson owned it. They just sold it to an actor. It's over in Pacific Palisades. When this article appeared in the LA Times in 2006, my phone calls just went off the hook. People had so many wonderful Colcord stories to tell. This is one of the first articles in years that had hit the paper. Colcord was the 35th registered architect in California, registered in 1930. He would go on to have 3 wives. His third and final wife was Virginia Singer, whom we'll meet in a moment. Remember when I said in 41 to 45, residential building had ground to a halt? Architects who were not commissioned for the war effort were summoned by the government to build office buildings from 41 to 45, much of it for the war effort. Colcord designed this building, which was only recently demolished. It's on the northwest corner of Wilshire and Crescent in Beverly Hills. There's a contemporary building there now. Later, he would also do restaurants. And I want to know how many of you recognize this restaurant. It was on Rodeo Drive. Does anybody know? The Swiss Cafe. Yeah. He did the interiors. And here's another shot. Right there. And there's Mr. Colcord. I found very few pictures of him, and for good reason. He loved to have a good time. You'll notice a cigarette in his mouth, a bottle of champagne, and a cup to drink it from. His wife is there on his right, and he was at the groundbreaking of the home that you'll see in a moment. Colcord loved to have a good time. One story that I heard over and over was, it was also popular for the day, but he was a major drinker. He never lost any work, was never in any accidents, but at the end of the day, he would drop in on his favorite client at the moment and start chugging him back. And his wife would become very irritated because inevitably he would miss their dinner engagement and she would have to call around town to find out where Jerry was. The picture you're looking at is from 1972. They lived in a rented Colcord on Woodvale Road in Encino. Very interesting story, which is in the book. Between his 3 wives, they never had kids, which is interesting in that he created family homes. He died at Cedars-Sinai in February of '84 of congestive heart failure, but he worked almost until his death. Here we are at part 3. So what got me interested in Colcord's work? First, you saw reason number 1, Horton House, where the Bob Newharts lived, and that confirmed my love of Colcord. But notice I said confirmed. I realized that during the book I had seen a very famous Colcord-esque interior for years, from the time I was about 5 years of age. Remember when Lucy and Ricky moved to Connecticut?
It's so nice of you to invite little Ricky to stay overnight at your house.
Oh, you two will have a great time.
I'm sure they will. Now you be a good boy, sweetheart, and mind Mrs. Munson. Yes. All right.
This is not a humorous clip, unfortunately, but it's the best one I could find to replicate the Colcord set that was designed in 1956. Transom over the door, the paneling, the narrow staircase. The rock fireplace, the beam, the wood log storage on the right behind that door, the bay window. Notice Ricky's elevator shoes. Fetch door.
All along the country.
What do we do all along in the country?
I don't know.
I got an idea.
What?
Let's go to the city.
You don't do that.
Fetch door.
Well, we can have dinner, maybe see a show, and then we have time, or just happen to be in the neighborhood. We're going to go see the merchants. What do you think?
There's
we're
the
gonna
hardware.
I think I
The
got
lamp.
no idea. I'll check the train schedule.
do? Okay, gee, I'm dying to see. I wonder if they've changed.
Hey, we only left them a day and a half ago. Oh, we missed that train. It was another one in 2 hours.
Well, let's try.
No, I think it's going to snow. I don't make any sense. We'll leave the car at the station and call them there. See if they're good.
The move to Connecticut in the script was a very fast decision in 1956. Desi Arnaz ordered the sets to be built immediately, and it took 4 days. His feeling was that the plots of all his shows, remember Desi Lou, all the shows that they did, his plots were so zany that he wanted the sets on all of his shows to be as accurate as possible and realistic. The set decorators relied on available design publications, mainly the Los Angeles Times Home section. This was 1956, and Colcord was at his height publicity-wise with series in the Los Angeles Times continually. There was a very interesting mistake made on the set, however. In the New York apartment, I Love Lucy, the set was 15 feet wide. When they built this, nobody thought about it, but the set was 45 feet wide. So the writers had to change all their writing to move actors up and down the stage. That's why you have those zany dance scenes and the eggs and the tango and all those kind of things, because they suddenly had to develop plots to move the actors up and down. Nobody thought of that, but it was too late. The set was built, so they had to go with what they had done. I heard countless stories of folks. Matt, why is my phone ringing? Let's worry about that. I heard countless stories of folks driving up and down West Side streets, taking pictures of homes they liked. Well, this is a case in point and reason number 3 as to why I love Colcord's work. River Meadow Farm in Napa. This was my very favorite home. It was built by Porter and Steinwebel in San Francisco, very prominent firm in the 70s. And it was built in the Napa Valley for a very, very wealthy businessman, Al Wilsey, and his socialite activist wife, Pat Montandon. He made all his money by inventing, he made all his money because he invented butter pats, those little bits of butter on wax paper. $300 million fortune in 1970. So that built him a 30-acre estate in Napa that made the social register all around the world. In 1975, Michael Taylor would do the interiors and would actually do 5 homes for the same family. It was based on a home you just saw, Johnson House in Stone Canyon. The architect glimpsed his house, and that was the basis for River Meadow Farm in Napa. And here's the Michael Taylor dining room. The home was so significant that it warranted 2 covers in House and Garden in 1977. There's the backyard, and there's Pat Montandon, the mistress of the house in the middle. And she doesn't look that different today. She lives in Beverly Hills. And then you're looking at the dining room again on the right. If you follow social history, Pat's best girlfriend at the time would get the husband, kick Pat out, and the home today is resided in by Dee Wilsey. So, which Colcord home is your favorite? That's easy. It's whichever one I'm in at the moment.
Oh.
However, my fondest one is this one right here. This one is in one of my favorite neighborhoods. I almost hate to talk about it because I'll live there one day and I don't want it being overwrought with undesirables. You're looking at the left in 1971. There's Gerard Colcord on the left. And you have a very lucky 29-year-old homeowner, Stephanie Stern, in 1971 at the groundbreaking of her home in Fryman Canyon. And it is just the warmest, most wonderful Colcord. You're there, you're enveloped. The worries of the day fade away. The home is on the upper left. It was based on a home that the owner had seen in Architectural Digest magazine, and it was built for Ingrid Bergman. And I have both images there, and I just want to show you. It's wonderful when an architect actually listens to his or her client. You'll notice how similar the homes were. Obviously a very, very happy home. Here we are inside, the wonderful staircase. Now remember culturally, forget the bricks and mortar. We're at 1972. Our culture has changed. The beginning of the great room. The homeowner had asked Colcord that we didn't want a den because my husband and I wanted our kids to be together and we would do more family activities together. So here's the living room. Extraordinarily large, extraordinarily intimate. It's about 25 by 35. I can almost stand in the fireplace. And opposite you, you're looking at the bar. Remember, after World War II, you're served at the bar by yourself. The housekeeper isn't going to serve you a drink, most likely. Here's the dining room, one of 4 fireplaces in the home. Wonderful angle nook there with that bay window. The joint, this is important because it's a lot of architects use this feature, you need to know. That joint is called a gun stock joint. It's the stock of a gun. From Norwegian. Here we are in the kitchen. Another fireplace. Another view of the kitchen. Here's the backyard, which this home could be anywhere in the world. Picture was taken probably 5 years ago, home's even more beautiful today. I'm not going to tell the story, but in the book, it tells the story of this room, the piano, and the fireplace. Oh, a wonderful heartfelt story. It's actually my favorite story in the book. But remember that lady who you saw, the very lucky 29-year-old homeowner? Well, through the magic of Hollywood, remember this is the entertainment capital of the world, I'm going to bring her to life for you. She's right here. And she's going to tell us, who still owns the home, she's going to tell us what Colcord is really like.
Bret did such an amazing job that all my material is gone, so I will very briefly tell you personally. First of all, Bret, the house looks so different, and that's a story into itself because I was gone for 2 years when I came back, and Bret and I became fast friends. He and I pooled our resources and ideas and totally redid this, including, and this might be shocking, when I'm looking at it now, I don't even recognize it. Bret said to me, in this room, you've got to paint out that paneling. And I went, no, it's wood, I can't touch it, and whatever. And I thought about it, and I went out that weekend and got a ream of white paper and spent the whole weekend pasting up white paper all over the paneling and squinted at it. And I went, he's right. And he said, just take a deep breath and just do it. And I did. And I wish I could show you people pictures now because it looks so much better. Anyway, that being said, I met Gerard Colcord in 1970 and was immediately taken with him. He was charming and humble and the most talented artist that I think that I've ever met. I saw some of his drawings. He had a tiny office not far from here that was really just one room and no assistants at the time. He would from time to time bring in a student that would help him a little bit, but for the most part it was a one-man operation. And don't forget, this was all pre-computer, pre-CAD, and his drawings, which I appreciate now more than I ever did, are so beautiful. And Bret keeps saying to me, you've got to frame these, and I haven't, and I probably will. But he drew, when we were in the beginning process of designing the house, he drew elevations of every room, and I can look at them now, and the rooms are exactly the way those elevations were before the house was even framed. So he was incredible. Even the handwriting, pre-Croy machine, and whatever, everything is done by hand, all the specs, everything. And I'm much more appreciative of it now than I was at the time. He had specialists that worked in every area. I don't know, well, you can see on the paneling there, it's all beveled edges, and these beams, every single beam was brought in and hand-hewn in the house. He had some tables set up that sawhorses, is what I'm looking for, set up in that big room, and one carpenter who, Jerry had an antique plane that had a rounded edge on it, and he said, you're only to use this plane, and he planed every single beam in the house. There were over 100 beams, and he kept a log of the hours that it took him to do that. And all of the plaster, which you also cannot see in this photograph, is hand rubbed. So he brought special gloves for the guys to wear while they were wiping down the plaster, and it made a beautiful texture on it. And I did hear some of the contractors, I don't know if I ever told you this, under their breath saying, I'll never bid his house again. We're losing too much money. It took hours to do this. And of course, I was a beneficiary, so I took care of the time. And as I said before, he was charming, and we had many dinners together, and I got to know him quite well, and I feel very fortunate. There's only one argument I think that I ever had with him. I don't think I told you this either. In the whole construction of the house, when it was finished, and we were talking about painting the house, exterior painting, he said, it's got to be white. I said, no, 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 no. It's got to feel soft, and it's got to feel like part of the landscape. And he said, no, it's got to be white because it's going to be photographed so many times, and it'll look better in photographs if it's white. And I said, you're probably right, but I'm going to be living here, so I don't want it white. And that was the only argument that we had. And other than that, oh, there was one anecdote that Bret particularly likes, that we were talking at one time about perhaps doing a third garage. We did not have 3 cars, but I wanted to have a room. I'm an artist, and I wanted a studio up above it. And I said, what would you think if we just expanded the garage a little bit? This was before we had framed the house. And he said, well, let me think what it would look like. And he had the back of a scrap of paper, and I'm not kidding you, in less than 2 minutes, he had drawn the most gorgeous picture, which I still have, of exactly what the end of the house would look like, with all just all the detail, everything. It was extraordinary, and that was the kind of artist that he was. And there's something really sad about everything being done by machines today. I'm a purist, and I'm so appreciative of the fact that I'm lucky enough to have lived in this house for 40 years. So, thank you. Okay.
When your Colcord was done, you were gifted with a French cock weather vane, which that's an original one at Stephanie's house. About half are gone now. Roofers don't really understand the significance and toss them in the pile. But if you see that exact replica, that is the Colcord weather vane. The other favorite Colcord I have is down in Palos Verdes, and this is the home of Mariana Riley, and it's a French provincial home. If there was a shot exactly opposite, you'd be looking at this Pacific Ocean. Incredibly sighted. That was one of Colcord's biggest talents. He knew where to put the house on the land. And there's a letter that the homeowner received. I include this because it's wonderful to think of a day when an architect or a professional would simply write you a handwritten note. Here he's concerned about the extraordinary cost of blueprints. He's talking about something being about $13.43. But just such a gentleman. I love this document. So how many interviews have you done? Well, I did over 300. I've done most interviews in Colcord owners' homes, but also while driving, in restaurants, in offices, in crowded lobbies. But my favorite, absolute favorite, is when I said, I can come over in about 30 minutes. My office is not that far away from your home. And she replied, but darling, I'm on my yacht in the middle of the Mediterranean. I won't be home until October. There's a wonderful aspect I never anticipated, and that is Colcord residents are the most wonderful, gracious, warm, hospitable, friendly folks I've ever encountered. It's easy to get sucked into the headlines of our times, but the process has taught me that there are terrific people out there in abundance. Of course, I got this question a lot, how do I buy the book? You can get it on Amazon. I've actually got a few copies of the trunk of my car. It's done very, very well. The publisher took a chance on me, and I'm just, of course, very grateful for that. And it's been a wonderful business card. And there's the book right there. When I wrote the book, I wrote it the way that I have read thousands of architecture books, and that is I love past and present. This is a Pacific Palace It's a French farmhouse before and after. What's also interesting, this is 1928 on Luca Drive. It's also what I consider part of the green movement. 80 years later, the home has never changed. It's never been ripped apart. It was so good to begin with, it doesn't need any changing. It simply means maintenance. That inherently, to me, is green architecture. Here's the living room. Other than maintenance and paint and a chandelier being added, these homes don't get changed. And the dining room, past and present. There's the back of the house. A pool was added in the absolute appropriate spot. Tom Boland is also working on this house. This is a lovely traditional in Pasadena off the Arroyo. And I just love it. There was the back before renovation, but I just love it when owners and designers get together and they make very sympathetic alterations. There's nothing wrong with remodeling a house, but the home tells you what it wants to do and be. Be sympathetic to it. Then you get the best results. And finally, if I knew then what I know now, it's something I couldn't possibly change. And that is to have started the book 20 years ago. I'm still lucky in that many folks associated with Colcord are still alive. However, I had no idea how difficult it would be to write a book about a deceased man with no living relatives, other than a nephew in Europe that took me 3 years to locate. And even when I did, it didn't help that much. Second, I thought this would have been a relatively easy project. It's hard, exhausting work, which I learned after I did 5 in-home interviews in one day. But 2 very funny stories emerged from this. One of them, I would find myself at 2 and 3 in the morning writing this book. With pure joy, I'd forget to go to sleep. I was on adrenaline, but happy adrenaline. And some New York publisher needed a press release, and so I just said, I'll do it. Well, you know, you're tired at 2 in the morning. I'm excited, but I'm tired. So I typed the press release, hit spell check, you know, which I always do. Words need to be spelled correctly. And what I didn't catch at the time was that my Microsoft Word program, spell check, turned Colcord into Colored. And I didn't catch it. So remember the days when we faxed? So I faxed the press release to New York so that they would have it in the morning when they arrived. And the publicist, actually not a publisher, but a publicist called, and she was very happy to get all the information. And she's a delightful lady, there was no problem. And she said, did Jerry Colcord know Paul Williams? Paul Williams being African-American, one of the early architects of our city, she just assumed that Paul Williams and Jerry Colcord knew each other. Second funny story, and I can say it because they're not really honest. I'm doing an interview, and a lovely, probably close to 60-year-ish couple had worked very hard. Delightful, salt-of-the-earth couple. You just love them immediately. They bought their first Colcord. That was their dream. They take not much furniture. Didn't matter. The home, you know, sung on its own without furniture. They're showing me everything, and I'm excited because it was an exceptional Colcord. I mean, they're all great. This one did have extra features. We're in the master dressing closet. For 1938, it had to have been an extraordinary closet beyond belief. Even today, it would be something you'd covet. But in 38, wow. And the lady was showing me all the cupboards. And she opened one and look here, my scarves and shoes, and built in this and built in that. Okay, opens the next one. And here's for the man of the house, and built in this, and look what he did here, and shoes, and blah, blah, blah. Opens another cupboard, does, can you believe all this extraordinary? Oh my God. Opens the 4th cupboard. But what she forgets is what was in the cupboard. All the sex toys fell out. Including the can of Hershey's syrup that just misses my big toe. The husband got red, but he was proud. She was mortified. And I quickly said, is that crown molding in the master? Excuse me, my Xanax is repeating on me. The reason this book was even possible is because of a woman in this picture. Her name is Lisa Kent, and she assisted Mr. Colcord from 1970 to 1984, and then she kept his office open for 5 more years, finishing the projects after his death. Here she is with her client, Harrison Ford, who would pick her up on a helicopter. She lived in San Diego by this time, and he would fly her to the job site. I interviewed him, and he's a huge fan of Lisa's. And if you read interviews about him, he often uses a quote from her. And Lisa Kent, the lady in that picture, saying, There is always room for better. Before we see the last clip, we have some thank yous, of course, to John and Michael and Susan, who can't be here. Just an extraordinary cast of characters at John Arrow Group, and Matt, who's in the control room. Obviously, this is exhilarating. I mean, this is a wonderful ride for me. And I can, my emotions go from, happy to sad in a second. I mean, I'm a realtor/author. So it goes, the days can be very exhilarating. They can also be very stressful. But one thing really does bring me back to at least center during a day. And that is what I'm going to mention right now, because it's so applicable to us. We live in the greatest country on earth. We live in the best state in the Union. And we live in an exclusive area that millions fantasize about living here, even just being able to visit. We're sitting in one of the finest communities in the world, located in the middle of one of the most prosperous regions that will ever exist until the end of time. We're indeed a lucky group, and I feel especially happy that I was able to present the subject that I love. But I wonder, what's Mr. Colcord thinking right now? We don't know how death works. Maybe he's looking at us, who knows? 27 years after his death, his work continues to promote great things: family, beauty, comfort, joy, love, and serenity. But most importantly, his architectural legacy brought us together this morning. And yes, Mr. Colcord created beautiful family homes, that's no doubt. But he also unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, he fostered a new family this morning that I'm very proud to be a part of. And as the presentation comes to a close, take a look at the 1992 movie. The player, as the main character, played by Tim Robbins, motors home to his pregnant wife in front of their Colcord farmhouse in Brentwood Park, owned in real life for the past 30 years by Nancy and Zubin Mehta.
Here's the switch. Larry, get off the speaker. I want to talk to you privately.
Look at the real estate sign.
He marries the typewriter's girl. Can you guarantee that ending? If the price is right, you got it. You can guarantee me that ending, you got a deal. I guarantee it, man. What do you call this thing, anyway? The player.
That was the garage with a simulated hayloft staircase.